Truth Unveiled here, and today I wanted to share some really important stuff with you. We're going to be talking about the EMP drill that the Department of Defense will be holding on November 4th through November 6th, and we'll also be briefly talking about Antifa. Now, the event scheduled for November 4th through November 6th, please keep in mind that it's just a drill. That does not mean there's going to be an actual EMP, but I definitely wanted to bring it to your attention. Now here's the press release that talks more about it. It comes from the Amateur Radio Relay League, and we're going to be talking more about that later on in the video to come. As you can see, it was released last week, and it says Communications Interoperability Training with Amateur Radio Community Set, and this was released as of October 24, 2017. It says elements of the U.S. DoD or the Department of Defense will conduct the Communications Interoperability Training exercise from November 4th through November 6th. Once again simulating a quote, very bad day scenario according to them. Amateur radio and Mars organizations will take part, and we'll be looking at their organization too later on in the video. Now note how it says right here, once again, because that's all they've been doing, testing and more testing, as we'll also go over. It says here, quote, this exercise will begin with the National Massive Coronal Mass Ejection event, which will impact the national power grid as well as all forms of traditional communication, including landline telephone, cell phone, satellite, and internet connectivity, Army Mars Program Manager Paul English explained in an announcement. Now, once again, this is a drill. During the exercise, a designated DoD headquarters entity will request county-by-county status reports for over 3,100 U.S. counties and county equivalents in order to gain situational awareness and to determine the extent of impact of the scenario. Army and Air Force Mars organizations will work in conjunction with the amateur radio community, primarily on the 60-meter interoperability channels, as well as on HF NVIS frequencies and local VHF and UHF non-internet linked amateur radio repeaters. Again, this year, a military station on the East Coast and another station that's located in Arizona will conduct a high-power broadcast on 60-meter channel 1 on Saturday this weekend from 3 o'clock to 3:15 UTC. New this year will be an informational broadcast as of Sunday that will be about at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Amateur radio operators should monitor these broadcasts for more information about the exercise and how they can participate in the exercise according to English. And towards the end of the report, it says here, quote, we want to continue building on the outstanding cooperative working relationship with the ARRL and the amateur radio community, English said, quote, we want to expand the use of the 60-meter interop channels between the military and amateur community for emergency communications, and we hope the amateur radio community will give us some good feedback on the use of both the 5 MHz interop and the new 13 MHz broadcast channels as a means of information dissemination during what they call a very bad day scenario. And why is it that they keep planning very bad day scenarios? We know this is not the first one. And why has your mainstream media been so quiet about this? What don't they want you to know? Because they've been planning for these things for a long time, not just for November 4th through November 6th, but all throughout 2017, 2016, and the list goes on, as we've also covered in some of these videos here. But if you would like to learn more about the ARRL, I've also done some background research on it, and it says that ARRL is the National Association for Amateur Radio in the U.S. It was founded in 1914 by Hiram Percy Maxim as the American Radio Relay League, or ARRL, which is a non-commercial organization of radio amateurs. Now, interestingly enough, when you look more into this organization, you start to find out that it's also the primary representative organization of amateur radio operators to who? Your U.S. government. It performs this function by lobbying the U.S. Congress and the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC. The ARRL is also the international secretariat of the International Amateur Radio Union, which performs a similar role internationally, advocating for amateur radio interests between the International Telecommunications Union and the World Administrative Radio Conferences. Now, the Mars program is also involved, and this is from the U.S. Army. As you can see right here, it comes from their website and says Mars stands for Military Auxiliary Radio System. They're headquartered in Arizona and assigned to the headquarters of the U.S. Army Network Enterprise Technology Command, or NETCOM. Army Mars is a Department of Defense sponsored program which utilizes the amateur radio operators to contribute to the mission of the Department of the Army. Now, interestingly enough, what they also do is that they have a long history of providing worldwide auxiliary emergency communications during times of need. Did you hear that? They're involved with what? Emergency communications. Why all of this testing, just like with FEMA and all those other alphabet soups? The combined two-service Mars programs with the Army and the Air Force volunteer force of over 3,000 dedicated and skilled amateur radio operators provide the backbone of the Mars program. And it says the main benefit of the membership is enjoying the amateur radio hobby through an ever-expanding horizon of Mars service to the nation. They also work by the slogan, quote, proudly serving those who serve. Now, here's something I found very interesting and suspicious indeed about the Military Auxiliary Radio System, or MARS program from the Air Force. As you can see right here, their mission is to provide contingency communication support on behalf of the men and women of the Department of Defense, DoD, and the entities too, and other U.S. government users in support of their important and diverse national security missions whenever, however, and wherever required. And then they also go over their vision and their values. But what I wanted to show you that's very important about this is their regions. Notice how they have 10 regions here. What do these regions remind you of? Oh yeah, the FEMA regions, with the 10 FEMA regions all across America. It's the exact same thing. And as you can see right here, it's pretty much the same. It's almost no different from the regions that the Mars program shows us from the Air Force. Very interesting and suspicious indeed. What are all of these alphabet soups really getting ready for is the better question. Now also, pay attention how this will be conducted during the weekend through November 4th through November 6th, all throughout the weekend. What does this remind us of? Another test that they did, which was what? The WannaCry ransomware attack, because we know this has something to do with it too. We know this is all due to the government and the Zionists at the very top who are staging all of these things. Because guess what? 6 months ago barely was the WannaCry attack. And when did it begin? It began on the weekend, wherein a so-called cyber attack infected more than 230,000 computers in over 150 countries. Does this sound familiar? Just like the X-Files. And when did this begin? It began right on the weekend and occurred all the way up until the 15th. And this is not the first time that this has occurred where it has begun on a weekend. Do you see the pattern? Do you see how all of this is a test and a drill getting ready for the big one? And whether it's this weekend or not, or whether if it's the week after or the year after or whenever it is they finally plan to stage it, I have a feeling that the real one will not be announced. And like I noted earlier in this video, this is not the first time that they've been planning for such events, because just like we've gone over in plenty other videos, and I'm going to reiterate it in this one, there was also the EarthX drill that took place over 2 months ago, which stands for Emergency All Sector Response Transnational Hazard Exercise, which is what? Designed, or should we say designed, to improve community resilience to what? Large scale, long duration power outages through multi-sector exercises. Now, this was another exercise that was done back in the summer of 2017 where they also got ready for black sky hazards, and we're going to be talking about what that is in a moment to come, which were catastrophic events that severely disrupt the normal functioning of critical infrastructures in multiple regions for long durations. Did you hear that? Again, this is not the first time that they've done this. And some of the hazards that they were getting ready for include man-made hazards like what? An EMP, just like what the DoD is getting ready for this upcoming weekend and beyond, and also an intentional electromagnetic interference, or an IEMI, so-called cyber terrorism, just like what we went over with Operation WannaCry, coordinated physical assaults, and then other things such as seismic events having to do with earthquakes, and we also had gone over Cascadia Rising 2016, which FEMA has done for the Pacific Northwest, because that's also what they're getting ready for: geomagnetic disturbances, hurricanes, and other severe weather events, more like man-made hurricanes. And what happened right after that scenario that occurred in the summer of 2017 through EarthX 2017? Well, barely 3 days after was Hurricane Harvey, wherein close to 250,000 people were left without power in Texas. Then there was Hurricane Irma that left over 1 million people without power in Puerto Rico. And let's not forget about all of the millions of people who were affected in Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas due to Hurricane Irma. How many millions exactly? More than 4 million. Are you starting to see a pattern? I am, because then there was also Hurricane Maria that caused the longest blackout in U.S. history in Puerto Rico that left the entire island without power. That's more than 3.4 million people, by the way. And the island is said to be left without power for months. Not only that, but there was also the FEMA directors and ex-FEMA directors who said that they would be in Texas for how many years after Hurricane Harvey, which was worse than Katrina, by the way. The storm was so bad from Hurricane Maria that 100% of Puerto Rico had lost power to its entirety, just like the drill getting ready for what? Long power outages in multiple regions. But we're not done, because then there was also Hurricane Ophelia that affected close to 300,000 people in Ireland who were left without power. And then guess what? Recently, millions are still left without power after the tropical storm Philippe hit the Northeast and struck the Northeast, bringing a ton of rain and flooding. Do you see a pattern going on here? All of this happening within barely 2 months, but some are still sitting there thinking that everything is all right. Some are still sitting there thinking, oh, everything is hunky-dory and nothing is actually happening. It's time to wake up and think again. Let's not forget about Operation Gotham Shield that also occurred earlier this year as of the spring of 2017, that involved and had to do with practice and preparation for what they call a nuclear explosion going off in certain areas and regions in New York City. And who was involved with this also? None other than the DOD. And mind you, all of this is coming out weeks after the movie Geostorm came out, that had to do and talked about significant weather events, just like we've been seeing with these man-made hurricanes and also these laser-directed energy weapon fires that have been going on in California, along with other movies such as The Purge and also The Fifth Wave that even talk about an EMP going off too. They're literally putting the truth right in front of your face. But the question is, are you awake to see it with both your eyes open? Because that's all they've been doing, literally putting all of this stuff right in front of your face. Just like here too with the Department of Energy, or the DOE, another alphabet soup, because what did they do at the beginning of 2017? They put together an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP Resilience Action Plan, and we're going to be going over that document together. Now, the summary itself says, in response to increased concern about the potential impacts to the electric grid from a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, or HEMP, in late 2015, the Secretary of Energy directed the development of an EMP resilience strategy in coordination with the electric power industry. In early 2016, the U.S. Department of Energy, or the DOE, began to work with the Electric Power Research Institute, or the EPRI, to develop such a strategy, according to them. The Joint Electromagnetic Pulse Resilience Strategy was then released in the summer of 2016, 6 months later. The development of the joint strategy was a public-private collaborative effort designed to establish a common framework with consistent goals and objectives that will guide both government and industry efforts to increase grid resilience to EMP threats. Even though there are no threats, they're the ones who are actually doing it. We know we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but let's keep going. Central to the development of the joint strategy was an effort to enhance shared government industry understanding of the current status or risk from and preparedness for HEMP events. Again, it's conditioning and programming, getting you ready. And then it says, following development of the joint strategy, both DOE and EPRI committed to developing separate but coordinated action plans that would implement the 5 strategic goals. EPRI's plan focused on those actions that industry would undertake to mitigate EMP risks. DOE's action plan delineates the steps that DOE will take to address EMP risks, according to them. What steps besides planning for it? But then it says, although the 2 action plans were developed independently, DOE and EPRI collaborated closely to ensure that the plans complement one another and avoid duplication of effort. The only effort they're putting into this is actually staging the EMP. Now here is the actual plan. It's only 26 pages long. I'll be sure to link it in the description box below. As you can see right here, it was released earlier in 2017. Now we're not going to go over all of it because the summary pretty much tells it for itself. It was released by who? The Department of Energy, another alphabet soups, as you can see right here. I'm going to go right to the table of contents that also talks about the introduction, the improve and share understanding of EMP threats, effects, and impacts, identify priority infrastructure, test and promote mitigation and protection approaches according to them, but who are they really protecting is the better question. Then it says enhance response and recovery capabilities to an EMP attack, and then share best practice across government and industry nationally and internationally. But what I want you to focus on here is Appendix A, chronological list of deliverables. Now, like I said, I'll be linking this in the description box below if you would like to read this document on your own time. It's only 26 pages long, but the reason we're here at the appendix is to show you the dates and how they're trying to plan all of this and the timeline that they're doing it. Now, as of 2016, their plans were to establish a working group of the Mission Execution Council to identify current gaps in EMP knowledge among the national laboratories and other federal agencies, along with maintaining classified and unclassified briefing materials that address the current understanding of the potential impacts of both high and low impact EMPs on the electric grid. Why does it have to be classified? Could it be because your government's the one that's planning this for problem reaction solution in order to turn America into a police state and bring about the New World Order, not only for America but the rest of the world when it comes to UN Agenda 2030, Operation Depopulation? But then it says also produce a report documenting MEC findings, establish an EMP information working group in coordination with the EPRI, which we just read, the ESCC, and appropriate stakeholders. But this is what I really wanted you to focus on, is their plans for this year in 2017, where they say create a schedule of industry, interagency, and cross-sector briefings using these materials. But then it says prepare a report that identifies and evaluates methodologies for identifying critical infrastructure, review findings, and includes recommendations. Now, this is the one that's very interesting and suspicious indeed, and this was when, as of yesterday, in coordination with DHS, what? Develop EMP planning scenarios that can serve as the basis for threat waveform specifications and assessment of EMP impacts and protection requirements for the grid, as well as supporting infrastructures. Could that explain what they're trying to do as of November 4th, the same day as Antifa is planned? Very interesting and suspicious indeed. And then by the end of 2017, they also want to develop and disseminate unclassified E1 waveforms. And what are E1 waveforms? Well, the EIS Council, which is the same council that talked about the EarthX 2017, which we talked about earlier, they explain it in their report right here, as they too are preparing for such things in their 168-page report, where it says the early time, or E1 high altitude electromagnetic pulse, HEMP, and its impact on the U.S. power grid. And on page 1, it says right here, the report describes the threat of the early time, or E1 high altitude electromagnetic pulse, HEMP, produced by nuclear detonations above an altitude of 30 kilometers. Now, this report is over 160 pages long. I'm not going to go over all of this, but it's funny how they also even list HEMP myths, which we are going to take a look at in their appendix. And of course, if you would like to take a look at more of this report, I'll link it in the description box below. But here they even list some of the myths that are associated with this. I find it funny how they even have a list right here for extremists, how it says some general emphasis of comments fall into either, quote, the world as we know it will come to an end. If there is a high altitude nuclear burst, or the other extreme, it's not a big deal, nothing much will happen. And they also talk about some other experiences too, but I find it very interesting that they would even list this here to begin with. What do they know? Now, interestingly enough, another thing that's scheduled this weekend has to do with Antifa, which is a political group that's staging protests, which is more than likely funded by Soros and all those other Zionists at the very top. Now, will there actually be protests on November 4th? We'll have to wait and see. We don't actually know for sure, but I wanted to bring it to your attention so that you can be awake, alert, and aware of the world around you. Please seek Yahuwah and his true son Yahusha, because as you see, there's just so much going on, and it's important that you stay alert to the world around you. But this is Truth Unveiled here, saying as always, Shalom.